Hazel, whenever you want to start.
Well, good evening. Thanks, Nushin, and good evening, everyone. It's really fantastic to see you all here for our second Wits Indaba, Wits Fund Indaba, a gathering to bring Witsies together and to help us connect with one another and to celebrate the success of Witsies in the United States. And you are a wonderful bunch, a fabulously successful group of people that Wits can be proud of, that got your start from Wits, as did I. And what a place it was. What a time that we all had there, and how wonderful it is to gather together some years later, different types of years, numbers of years for many of us, but how wonderful it is to gather together and to reconnect and to connect and learn from one another and to celebrate Witsies in the United States and the heritage that we got from our wonderful alma mater. The point of the Indabas is to really feature some of our eminent Witsies, to learn from them, to have an opportunity to discuss, to reconnect, to explore. Our first Indaba, we were honored to have Dr. Arthur Rubenstein speak about his journey. And this Indaba, we are equally honored to have Dr. David Fine to talk about his journey. Dr. Fine is, as you will hear, a really eminent and unusual Wits graduate who is also a wonderful supporter of Wits. And we are so grateful to Dr. Fine for his contributions to the university and to establishing the David and Angela Fine Chair, which he has recently done. And I think Stan Bergman, the chair of the Wits Fund, may say more about that in a moment. I pulled out an article about Dr. Fine from the Jewish Report that was published a few months ago, and I'll put the URL in the chat because I thought it was terrific. It really gives a sense of a person who has gone through life in his own way, not according to some predetermined route, not according to some acceptable kind of trajectory, but in his own way, figuring out how to go from his Wits education, where he got a BSc chemistry honors, to move along a pathway of innovation and entrepreneurship in really admirable and interesting ways. So from the Jewish Report, which you will see, I understood that Dr. Fine has been innovative in many multiple different ways. He worked at now Thermo Fisher, one of the major companies in equipment and innovation for 28 years. And then went on to form two companies of his own, Cytera and Vera Biotech. He preceded that by developing the first airport sniffers that could detect traces of plastic explosive residue in passenger luggage. He went on to develop ways to detect traces of various chemicals, toxic chemicals, including nitrosamine, that is associated with cancer. He developed a handheld detector for finding buried landmines. And the list of innovations and accomplishments of Dr. David Fine goes on and on. But what I loved about this article were his comments about misconceptions around innovators. He said there were many misconceptions around innovators, including that they needed to be highly knowledgeable about their subject. I loved that. And he went on to say, go read a little bit about what you're interested in, but you don't have to know all the literature to go on and do something useful. Just know enough. There's a lot that I know we will learn from you David, Dr. Fine, as you speak with us today, I'm really so grateful that you have agreed to share your time, your wisdom, your trajectory with us. And in a moment, I'm going to pass this over to Stan Bergman to give a bit more introduction here. But I will just say to all of you in the audience, the agenda is that Stan Bergman, the chair of the Wits Fund board, will give the introduction to Dr. Fine following my preamble. Dr. Fine will then give his talk, and then we will open the discussion for, actually, let me check my notes here. Then Stan will come back and have a little bit more discussion with David Fine before we open up for questions to everyone. I would encourage you to put some questions in the chat because it's really interesting to see your thoughts. And I will also encourage you to introduce yourselves both in the chat, if you like, and then as we get to the Q&A, so that we can all get to know one another in ways that we really didn't before, and what an awesome opportunity this is. So without further ado, Stan Bergman, please take it away.
Thank you, Hazel. Good evening, everyone, fellow Witsies. Thank you for calling in today. I think we're going to be in for a great evening. I can't wait to hear what makes David tick. It should be very, very fascinating. But before we actually go into the discussion with David, Hazel, I'd like to congratulate you again for the remarkable honor you recently received by being named as a fellow of the American Association for Advancement of Science. It's obviously a lifetime honor awarded to scholars for exceptional contributions and leadership in the scientific fields. So my suspicion is a lot of this began in classrooms at Wits, and then from there you took it and went to the top of your profession. So congratulations, Hazel.
Thanks very much. And indeed, chemistry was in my past. So David, Fine, we have a little connection there. Thanks very much, Stan.
So congratulations. And of course, David Fine, Dr. David Fine, is one of the preeminent graduates of the University of Witwatersrand, a remarkable individual, as you will find out. Dr. Fine, David Fine, was born in September 1942 and grew up in Johannesburg, attending Wits from 1960 to 1963. He graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry honors in January of 1964. And from there, he went on to Leeds University and received a PhD. What was that? I got it right, Leeds, yeah. And went on to receive his PhD in physical chemistry in 1967. A few years later, Dr. Fine immigrated to the United States, where he joined the Faculty of Chemical Engineering, the actual Chemical Engineering department at MIT, and ran the combustion lab at MIT. You heard from Hazel, went on to Fisher. Thermo Fisher is known today. Spent almost 3 decades with his own federally funded research, founded his own company, as Hazel mentioned. David, Dr. Fine, is now retired, but I suspect that his mind is as good as ever. He remains active and continues to publish. He's done this extensively over his whole life. Hundreds of published papers. And get this, 107 US patents. That's so far. But what I think is most admirable about David, he asked Wits, through the Wits Fund, to help establish an endowment which would support an innovation chair at Wits. So his world of innovation, he now wants to transfer that thinking and that academic inquisitiveness to Wits through the establishment of an innovative chair at Wits. And David set a tremendous example. He funded the chair with a generous donation of $3 million, which is being used for the establishment of the Angela and David Fine Chair in Innovation. The chair will help establish an ecosystem to drive researcher-led innovation at Wits. And I expect that it will solve some of Africa's greatest challenges, being where this chair is being situated. And of course, advance public good in general, whether it's in South Africa, on the continent, or around the world. So to both Angel and David Fine, we say thank you for your generosity and vision. This gift will no doubt have an impact on generations of South Africans, Africans across the continent, and in fact, society in general globally. Individuals around the world will benefit. So, David, we really look forward to hearing of your remarkable life story and perhaps some of the key lessons that you have learned. Thank you for, of course, your most generous, you and your wife, contribution to Wits. But thank you for agreeing, more importantly, to share your life's journey with us. This will be videoed and will be able to be viewed by many for years to come. So David, please.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Hazel. As Stan mentioned, I grew up in Johannesburg, and my first memory really of school was my teacher telling me how stupid I was. I failed first grade, and I remained at the bottom of my class throughout primary school. I went to King Edward's High School and only started to become a little bit interested when the first Sputniks came over in 1957, and suddenly I was interested in how did they do that. I went to Wits. I went to Wits and studied chemistry, physics, maths, and applied maths. And it was a difficult time at Wits. It was the height of apartheid. And in my third year, my sister had hidden Mandela in her home. And a year later, in '63, the ANC was arrested at the home of my very close first cousin, Hazel Goldreich, at Lily Lee's farm in Livonia. We wrote our final exams. I remember the date very clearly. It'll come to you in a moment, 22nd of November, 1963. And a party to celebrate that night was broken up when the news came across that President Kennedy had been assassinated. I went to work at Mortarpentine, African Explosives facility, until August, and then went to the UK. And I went to Leeds. They were a center of fast chemistry. I studied combustion and explosion chemistry. It was a ball. I mean, I was blowing things up all the time, sometimes accidentally, and it was like every day was Guy Fawkes Day. I graduated in '67, spent a year as a postdoc there. Then we went to Winnipeg in Canada. I had a 2-year postdoc. It was the middle of the Vietnam War. And in South Africa at that time, there was almost no American history taught, certainly no American geography. So we knew very little about America. But 6 months into my 2-year postdoc, I got a letter on my desk saying, due to your incompetence and stupidity, you're fired. Biggest shock in my life. Here I was being called stupid again and incompetent. The reason I was never really told, I'd been discussing with the prof that what he was trying to do defied the laws of physics and fluid dynamics. And there may have been later on, I realized I had published a lot more papers than he had. In those 6 months, I had published more than he had in his career. And I put his name on 2 of my papers because he was paying my salary. But it was a shock. I had a 2-year-old and another on the way. And had a hell of a time finding a job. I applied all over Canada, the US, even Australia, and even South Africa. My Leeds professor suggested I contact a prof at a place I'd never heard of before called MIT. They asked me to come to Cambridge for an interview, and I couldn't find Cambridge on my Rand McNally Atlas in those days before Google. I was quizzed in the interview on what I would do with their various ongoing research. I was startled by how much they were doing. And unintentionally, I was also very critical of some of their planned studies. So I thought I'd blown the interview, but a few weeks later, I was startled when I got an offer for a 3-year faculty position at MIT. So being fired was hell at the time, but it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Here I'd gone from a third-rate Canadian university to one of the top places in the world in one hop. It was a dream job. I was supervising 8 to 10 PhD students in the combustion field. It was just the time when people were concerned about air pollution and understanding how nitric oxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide are formed in flames, in engines. I built a first high-speed instrument, chemiluminescence instrument for NO based on a paper that I'd read. And I got to consult for a number of companies, including Thermo Electron. And after 3 years at MIT, Thermo offered me a job with a 50% salary increase. It went from $13,000 a year to $19,000 a year. And I remained at Stansted at Thermo for 28 years. A very small company when I joined. When I left, it was a multi-billion-dollar company. My first eureka moment happened about a year after I was working at Thermo. At the last moment, I was asked to join my boss for lunch with a visitor, Sam Epstein, who'd written a book on the politics of cancer. And he was telling us about carcinogenic nitrosamines. He said, highly carcinogenic materials, but no one knows how to measure them. I didn't know what a nitrosamine was, so I asked him, and he drew a formula, and it was a eureka moment for me. I felt an emotional high, tingling sensation in the nape of my neck. I can still remember it. I looked at that formula and thought, wow, that NO bond. I had written 4 papers on bond energies. I knew how to break that bond. It'll fall apart very easily, and it'll give NO. The NO fragment, I know how to measure that. That's what I've been doing at MIT. And Thermo has a new instrument to do that. Everything fell in place. I knew it would be like a lighthouse in a dark night, shining, here I am, here I am. And that's how the TA detector for nitrosamines was founded. All serendipity, right moment, right person, right background, right time. But then I hit pushback, and the pushback was ferocious. There were 3 major roadblocks that we hit. And I realized after this experience that pushback is common for innovators, especially if it works in practice, but not in theory, or it's contrary to current practice. If you do that, you'll be called not in your right mind, incompetent, stupid, crazy, a charlatan, a trickster, a lying son of a bitch. And I've been called all these names on many times, many occasions, particularly when I go into a new field. And innovators need to be prepared for it. Vicious personal attacks can be devastating. I've spoken with people who've done some innovating, hit this problem, and just been shy and terrified of going back and trying to do something new again. The first pushback came when I went to a meeting dedicated to the analysis of nitrosamines in Lyon, France. And the paper did not go over well. People asked, why were bond energies relevant? Why measure NO? You can't even pronounce the words correctly. And I had a fight in the last day to even have my paper allowed to be printed in the proceedings. The second experience of this pushback came about 6 months later when World Health organized a round-robin study, and they sent cans of luncheon meat to any lab in the world that wanted to analyze. We tried on our own cans of similar meat, none of the methods worked. So we had to develop our own methods where we added mineral oil and distilled it out of the oil. We got our results. I was hoping, we were at least as good as the other people. And then a few weeks later, I got a furious phone call from Lyon, France, calling me a lying, cheating bastard. He demanded to know how I had stolen their codes. He told me that no one, not a single lab, had got anything right. They couldn't understand which nitrosamine was in which can, never mind the identity or the concentration. We got it right, got it all right. It was just obviously impossible. When he finally calmed down, I invited him to come to Boston, spend a couple of days with us, bring some new cans with him. We'd show him how to do the analysis, and he could see for himself. He followed that up a few weeks later. He was on his way to Washington and was very apologetic afterwards because he got the results that, perfect results, as he called it. I thought finally, hey, we're in the club. It didn't work that way. A few weeks later, I received a letter from the NIH canceling our small research grant. I exercised my right for a one-on-one meeting as to why. And I was told, the meeting was held at the FDA in Washington, no one in their right mind would use mineral oil. You obviously are an incompetent fool. Mineral oil is not an approved reagent. It's never been done before. You bought it in a drugstore. You've got to buy these things from a qualified supply house. You have no clue about analytical chemistry. And I remember saying you're an embarrassment to the field. I asked him how he had done in the analysis, and he said, no, it was very difficult. They couldn't find anything in all 6 cans. And I said, you know the results? And he said, yes, your lab apparently got it right. I said, yeah, we invented our way out of trouble. Your approved methods and protocols be damned. I don't care about what's right or wrong or what's acceptable. We found a way to do it. And now you can too. Just follow what we did and we're going to publish it. I said, what you did was you analyzed 6 cans like watching a movie 6 times, hoping for a better ending. And I quoted Bernard Shaw, the reasonable man adopts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Well, we got our grant back, and finally, we were accepted. And suddenly we were the de facto leaders of the field. That same year, National Cancer Institute bought 10 of my research pieces of equipment, the TA analyzer. In fact, we sold hundreds, and we were off and running. And the field was suddenly blown open. Everyone with our analyzer and using our methods could analyze for nitrosamines. While we were doing this, we came across a situation where we found beer contained nitrosamines. We analyzed all beers, and German group had done the same thing. All European beers contain nitrosamines. We analyzed other alcoholic beverages, and only beer and scotch had nitrosamines. Scotch and beer have one very common element. They're both made from malt. What is malt? You take barley, you germinate it in water, you get little rootlets, and then you dry it, and that's used as the basis to ferment to make the beer and the scotch. I went out to a malting house. The malting house was only too pleased to have me come out, and it was my second eureka moment. They were drying the malt with the products of combustion going right over the barley. And just think of the coincidence. Here I was, a nitrosamine chemist. Not only that, I was an expert in combustion, and I had done the studies on how NO is formed in flames. They were passing NO right, cooling it as it went, right over the rootlets. They got to form nitrite and form the nitrosamines right there. Pure serendipity, pure luck. I was the right person at the right time. They went to indirect firing, solved the problem overnight. And a lot of problems were like this. It was fun. It was disruptive as hell. We found nitrosamines in cosmetics, herbicides, in factories. And people around the world were finding nitrosamines everywhere. And by 1982, at age 40, I'd published over 100 papers. I had funding from the National Cancer Institute, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. Environmental Protection Agency, National Science Foundation. I had testified to Congress on food safety. I was a member of the US Academy on a special panel for food safety. I even testified to the German Parliament and been a guest of the Soviet Union on this subject. But when I added it all up, nitrosamines, yeah, they were important, but they could only account if you considered man as a large rat or a large dog for a fraction of human cancer. This wasn't the answer. And it was getting boring. We were now analyzing the potential of nitrosamines from shellfish versus finfish. And I felt I would soon know more and more about less and less and become an expert in nothing. It was boring, it was stagnating. And although I was at the top of my field, I decided to get out. This was not what I wanted. This was boring. I wanted the excitement of new discoveries again. So changing fields allowed me to have fun again. And it led to the invention of literally dozens of new products. Well over $1 billion in sales. We employed many thousands of people. And one measure, as Stan mentioned, was well over 100 US patents. Would not have happened if I hadn't changed fields. And as you'll see, as I'll go through some of these, what we did, no brilliance, no insight, just plain dumb, blind luck and timing. I happened to have worked in the same area or stumbled across something purely by accident. Let me give you some examples. Here I was, a combustion engineer. I was a nitrosamine chemist. I knew how rocket engines worked. And the fuel for a liquid fueled rocket is unsymmetrical dimethyl hydrazine and N2O4, dinitrogen tetroxide. It's a hypergolic mixture. You mix the two, they ignite, no need for oxygen. And the hydrazine was almost chemically identical to the nitrosamine, except where there was two hydrogens, nitrosamine had an oxygen. And I thought, surely they can't make the rocket fuel from the nitrosamine. Found there was a plant in Baltimore that made rocket fuel. Set up some sampling out downwind of the plant in a residential area, and eureka, we found nitrosamines in the air. And obviously that created a huge turmoil, and we got a lot of research funds. Then sort of following that line of thought, in 1980, a Titan II intercontinental ballistic missile with a 9 megaton hydrogen bomb on it blew up in its silo near Damascus, Arkansas. And it landed right near the launch complex gate. The Air Force and NASA needed better leak detectors, obviously. We won that contract with ease because we could do both. We could do both things. And I remember climbing all over a rocket silo and also the launch pads at Cape Kennedy for this new shuttle, and thinking it was just 23 years since I'd seen the first Sputnik come over Johannesburg. I had a ball. It didn't end there. 26 years after that, I found that NO was becoming this molecule I've been working with was an important drug to treat pulmonary arterial hypertension. And I realized I could use this rocket fuel N2O4 to make that drug, and in fact, use it actually in a hospital. And so I'd gone from nitrosamines in there to an ICBM silo to a new drug, founding a new drug company. I'll go into more of that in a moment. Explosives was obviously one that was of great interest to me. I'd done a PhD in explosives. I'd worked in an explosive factory. All explosives are nitro compounds, nitroglycerine, nitrotoluene. I knew how to heat them up just a little bit more to break off the NO2 group, and realized we could detect plastic explosives, PETN and RDX, for the first time. And I demonstrated it to a US government scientist at our facility. He wrote a report in which he claimed what I had done and what he had seen was mathematically impossible. He wrote I was a trickster and a charlatan. Well, his assumptions were dead wrong. It was garbage in and his garbage out was literally projectile diarrhea. He was wrong by almost a factor of 1,000,000. But his report went into the government literature, security literature, and it slowed. We didn't deploy explosive detectors in US airports for another 19 years. We did, however, build a machine for forensic post-blast analysis. First time it was used, mathematically impossible detector was used when Pan Am Flight 103 blew up over Lockerbie, Scotland. And the Brits used it to identify the explosives as Semtex, which was PETN and RDX, and that led to the arrest of the perpetrators. In 1963, terrorists attempted to blow up the World Trade Center by toppling one building into the other. That failed, the bomb had gone off, and I was personally there at that time assisting the FBI. And again, our mathematically impossible detector had no problem finding the nature of the bomb, and that led directly to the arrest of the people involved. And in 1994, that detector won the highly prestigious Presidential Design Award. It was awarded by first President Bush and presented by President Clinton at the White House. But it was very natural to try and find explosives before they went off. And that was very tough. FAA, who was responsible for airport security, fought us tooth and nail. We were adopted and in use at checkpoints on the borders and at airports in Germany, Switzerland, Israel, and the UK, but not the US. And it was a very difficult time in my career. People in FAA certainly just refused to believe what we were doing. And it wasn't until 95 that FAA, with various changes, finally began to buy our machines. Every new invention I got into sort of leveraged the next one, and all by accident. In the early days of the explosive detector development, 1980, I was trying to make it more and more sensitive, and we had to get sharper and sharper peaks. And while I was doing that, there was another group in the company at Thermo Fisher working on air pollution monitors, SO2 for sulfur dioxide. And they had a new detector based on pulse fluorescence, and it was about to be announced, big fanfare at FAA, and they suddenly found that diesel trucks, with smoky diesel trucks, or a car with a smoking exhaust, set it off and would give very sharp peaks. And they'd worked on it for a week and were exhausted. I happened to bump into them over lunch, and they told me about the problem, and it was like, hey, eureka. Here I am trying to make sharp peaks. You're trying to get rid of sharp peaks. Why don't I do the exact opposite of what I'm doing, and you try it? And gave them the worst possible chromatographic column. And in a couple of hours, we solved their problem. And that's how that machine was shipped. And it's still the standard method for measuring sulfur dioxide. Again, luck, I happened to be working on the exact opposite problem at that time on that day, meeting at lunch. I can't describe it anymore as serendipity. It didn't end there with that detector. Several years later, 12 years later, we were working with the Coca-Cola company on sniffing plastic refillable bottles. They're not used in the US, but they are widely used in South America, Germany, Holland, and in South Africa. We did testing in South Africa. But the refillable plastic bottle, or 1 liter bottle, is a convenient way to have an emergency supply of gasoline. And people would drive around and put gasoline in these bottles. And when they got tired of them, they'd return them, wash them out, return them. And they were battling at Coca-Cola at the time to find a way to detect these, because the smell, you could smell it in the bottle, but the beverage would taste awful if you drank it. They told me of it, and I had an instant answer. I know how to do that. We got hold of an instrument, that a sulfur dioxide instrument, took out this filter, and again, pure luck. Problem solved. It was only solved because I'd done that work myself personally earlier. The Coca-Cola work, and not only Coke, it was all the beverage companies, was very large. In fact, 14 of my patents are assigned directly, not to Thermo, but to Coca-Cola, because we're working so closely with them. We developed how to sample the bottles, and then how to sample for nitrogen-containing compounds, which are mostly herbicides, pesticides, dead bugs, mold, etc. It became a massive business for Thermo, one of the largest things I had developed at Thermo. We went working with these beverage companies. One of the people from another company moved to a beer company, major US brewery in California, and he called me up later to say they've got a real problem. When you can beer, if they put a drop too much of beer in the can, the tax authorities in California were taxing them because they sell millions of cans. And if they don't put enough beer in, then the consumer groups were after them, and they didn't have the accuracy. Well, I'd been around airport tests so long, I knew how the airport X-ray machines worked. And we built a X-ray machine-based simple system for measuring the fluid level in a can. And we had the accuracy now. And we could even tell how much beer was in the foam and the shape of the dome on the top. And that product still dominates the market. It was a huge market and still dominates that product, that marketplace worldwide. How did that happen? Someone came to me with a problem because I was working in the field. In 1997, I had a sort of a 2-year diversion and sort of recharge myself. In 96, Thermalase, a thermoelectron spin-out, offered the first FDA-approved laser hair removal treatment. It was an Nd:YAG, and they put a black carbon material on your skin, and the carbon was supposed to go down the hair follicle, and when you put the laser on it, it would heat up and essentially blow up the hair follicle. And the company claimed it was permanent, but hair came back. So as a troubleshooter, Thermo sent me out to San Diego, La Jolla, to troubleshoot and run their R&D. I learned more about the hair follicle than I ever wanted to know. Anagen, telogen, catagen, all the phases of hair growth. And most importantly, that the hair follicle was also the site of stem cells for wound healing. And the last thing you wanted was permanent hair removal based on destroying the hair follicle. So it was a very interesting period of change in pace. And when I came back to Boston from there, I went from working on how to remove hair from a woman's bikini line to developing a handheld detector for locating buried personnel and metallic landmines. Just a little shift in direction and relevance. I thought the way to do it would be to sniff for TNT, which we could do with high sensitivity, built an instrument to do that, which was handheld. The machinery worked. The idea was a hopeless flop because TNT vapor from a mine is rarely on top of the mine. It depends on the topography, there's a grass root up there or a stick or the rain runoff. And often the high concentration is a feet or 2 feet away from the mine. So total failure. But another group in the company based in Florida was working on fusing ground penetrating radar and metal detection as a way of looking in the ground. I started to work very closely with them, and in '99, Thermo was becoming a huge instrument company, and they wanted out of the R&D business. And here I was running an R&D project for them, but an important one. And I offered to take it off their hands. I said I would start a new company, totally independent, called Cytera, and I would take responsibility for this. When we went to the Army to tell them what we had done, they were not happy. They wanted a major defense contract to do it because they wanted stability with their employees. So I made the company employee-owned. Everyone who worked there, initial employees, had to put up $10,000 to work in the company. And the program was, the Army agreed to, this was a very stable way for a base of a company. We were very successful. The detector became what's called HSTAMIDS, or ANPSS-14 in military jargon. And it's the US mine detector still for the US Army. It was developed just in time for the American invasion of Afghanistan. Works under all soils, even if there's a lot of metallic fragments, like on a battlefield. MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, made an exhibit of it as the headline, Minesweeper or Art. It's both. And those original employees, we sold the company in 2006 in 6 years to L3. And each one of those employees walked away with almost $1 million from that investment. So it was a huge success. And even while I was still at Cytera, NO in 2000 had been approved as a drug for pulmonary arterial hypertension. And it was being delivered in gas tanks, up 40, 50 pounds, used in an ICU, very expensive, a lot of complex equipment to make sure the nitrogen dioxide levels weren't too high. And here I was someone who'd worked with rocket fuel, N2O4, which could be converted into 2 molecules of NO. And it's very easy to convert the NO2 into NO by putting it over an antioxidant like vitamin C. And so I decided when I sold Cytera to start a new company called Geno. It's now called Vero. And I was told I was just not in my right mind to even think of using rocket fuel. And you're going to make the drug at the bedside from rocket fuel? Are you crazy? We battled initially with that kind of thinking. But the reduction in size was about 1 millionfold. We ruggedized it. You could drop the equipment from 10 feet onto concrete without breaking, whereas a gas bottle would become an unguided missile. And in 2019, FDA approved that drug for human use, initially for neonates, and it's now got approval for some other things. I'm not affiliated with that company anymore. It was acquired by a Brazilian billionaire, and myself and all the other founders were forced out. But let me dispel some myths about innovation. Stan referred to this earlier. People think innovators are super intelligent geniuses with a phenomenal memory, and that innovators are childhood prodigies. That's crap. Take me as an example. I failed first grade. I did poorly at school. Another thing that they think of is you have to be highly knowledgeable. Again, the reverse is true. As a Zen Buddhist monk, as Shunri Suzuki wrote, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are few. An expert who's really on top of his narrow field really innovates. It's very often a student coming in or someone on the periphery that does the innovation. The expert's mind is just too cluttered very often to innovate. We're all born with this innate ability to innovate. 5-year-old kids play in a sandbox with toys and blocks, and they think they're planes. And every one of us innovates every day with the recipes we cook, the clothes we wear, the way we decorate our homes. A lot of it's stamped out of us as we grow up. At school, we learn by rote, and you only get rewarded if you spit it back. Organized religion over the years has probably taught people how to think. Advertisements, especially on TV today, tell us what to buy, whether you need it or not. Even politicians now tell us what to think and how to think. I found serendipity, and I'll conclude with this, is critical to innovation. All my discoveries were based on luck and timing and personal knowledge and diversity. I never became an expert. I consciously walked away when I was becoming an expert. And let me conclude with a sort of following thought. If indeed many new inventions by others happen by luck and timing, just think of how innovation and invention will flourish when more and more people begin to try their luck and have the courage to innovate for themselves. Thanks.
Wow, David. Whew. What an inspirational presentation. So you and I share one thing in common. My equivalent to a high school counselor at Grey High School in Port Elizabeth said I should not bother to go to university as a chemistry teacher, so I never quite understood chemistry. But then I went to Wits, and that changed my life. What drove you to disregard what you were told early on in high school, or maybe to me it was in elementary school, and just drove yourself and got yourself going in areas of interest. What was it? Was it a desire to prove to others? Was it something in you, a clock? What was it?
Well, I remember at King Edward's, the guidance counselor in Form 4, we had to fill out a form, which I filled out on a bus with shaky handwriting. And I told him at that time I was interested in medicine, like my father was a physician in Johannesburg. And he just laughed at me and said, "There's no way you can have the ability to be a physician. Maybe you should think of being a butcher." And I sort of laughed at him, and I don't know, I just disregarded all these kind of inputs. They had no impact on me. I didn't care how I dressed or what clothes I wore or fitting in. It was just, I had to find something that was interesting. And I got fascinated by the Sputnik, and then chemistry and physics and maths, mainly physics and chemistry. And it was just, I wanted to have fun. I enjoyed blowing things up for a PhD program. I was like a kid in a sandbox. Guy Fawkes was every day, and then it was just, again, just following that kind of lead. And there was nothing there to drive me so much as I was just curious and wanted to have fun. And it was always great fun, I found, when you entered a new field to realize, wait a bit, they're doing it wrong. I can do that better. And no, you weren't an expert, but you already knew scientific methods, and you had to learn more before you could launch it. But it was always fun to do that.
So I think I'm going to allow time for those on this call to ask questions, but I have one question that I'm extremely curious about. You went to Wits, you came to the United States, you did work at MIT, other academic institutions. What made you want to return something to Wits? It was a long time ago you were at Wits. You were in the American system by then, connected to American institutions. What drove you to make this exceptionally generous grant?
Several things. One was I had left Wits in the middle of apartheid. Growing up, I'd never, ever met a person of another color skin by age. I just wasn't a way to meet anybody like that. And I felt I wanted to repay something. Another fact was, if I give a grant like that, say to MIT, it's a small drop in the bucket. At Wits, it's going to be a huge amount for two reasons. Number one, it goes a lot further. And number two, they don't have a multi-billion-dollar endowment. And I felt it would do a lot of good, not only for that reason, but at the source of the problem. Africa has problems. And the solution to their problems may not be high tech and what we do in electronics and things. It may be other very practical things that practical innovators can do. And I feel that the multiculturalism of people growing up in different societies, different color skin, different backgrounds, different religions. I found always working with people from foreign countries, and Chinese, Russian, Indian, Pakistani scientists all together. We often solve problems that any one of us would not have been able to solve because we didn't have the culture that they had. And someone would say something and someone else would pick it up. And it was very powerful, that multicultural, whatever you want to call it, background to solve problems. And Africa needs that. I mean, those are the fundamentals of that.
Well, I 100% agree with you. Today, Wits is a melting pot of people from literally all over Africa and indeed the world. Mary and I had the opportunity to participate in a graduation at Wits about 4 years ago. And it was amazing to see the PhDs that crossed the stage to get their degrees, people from all over Africa, all over the world. And indeed, a majority were women and people of color. And these were earned degrees. This was quite remarkable. Wits provides a unique platform in Africa for advancing multicultural culturalism and advancing collaboration amongst people from all different backgrounds. So Hazel, with that in mind, I think you're going to chair a session on Q&A is what I'm understanding.
I like the way you put that, Stan. I'm going to chair the session on Q&A for sure. Thank you. That's a lovely discussion that you just had with David Fine. David, that was just an extraordinary discussion of your trajectory and your wisdom, your science, which resonates with me a lot. I listened to you talk about nitric oxide, which, as you know, is a biological molecule as well as a toxin. And my own research has explored the use of nitric oxide in facial development, which was really quite surprising. So I think this sort of notion of chemistry everywhere and your engagement with different aspects of chemistry for such a multitude of different applications, all the way from detection to from explosive detection to the many other things you talked about into the biological aspects is really quite extraordinary. I think we were all fascinated by your discussion of your really free but creative and effective trajectory. There's really some lesson there, I think, for every single person, but for on this call, but also for those students who are coming up along their pathways. And I hope that there'll be an opportunity for you to talk to some of the young people who are right now Wits students and, you know, other students as well, who can learn that keeping going, determination, creativity, and actually having the conviction that you have an idea that's worth following. Outstanding lessons, I think, for everyone today. So thank you so much for your time and that really outstanding talk. We're going to open for questions right now. I want to acknowledge a couple of people, though. I want to acknowledge Mike Fine and Karen Fine, who are David's Fine's son and daughter. Welcome. We're so happy to have you here. I mentioned right at the beginning that we're all a Wits alumni. That's not actually quite true. And I want to acknowledge Bruce Hubbard, who sits on the Wits Fund board. Hey, Bruce, who is a dedicated Wits supporter. While not being an alum, and we always welcome anyone who loves Wits, as we all do. And, you know, I want to acknowledge Stan's discussion there of what makes it so worthwhile to continue to connect with Wits. In my own trajectory, I have stayed very closely connected with Wits, with Professor Barry Dwalatsky, who, hello, Barry, it's so great to see you, who is working with David Fine and also you know, working with me and has worked in setting up an MIT Wits program. And now we're setting up a Northeastern University Wits program. The connection with Wits is so valuable. It is such a fantastic university. It was for all of us, and it is still. It's truly, you know, in my view, the greatest university in Africa, and it's a place where I think anything there is such possibility. Anything is possible in terms of connections and getting things done. And, you know, encourage everybody to really stay connected in whatever ways you can and want to Wits through this Indaba series and through your support, because this is truly an unusual and fantastic university that we are all connected with. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to be a Witsie. So with that, let me now invite you to give your questions to Dr. Fine. Let's see, I'm looking in the chat here. Marion Bergman, do you want to say your question out loud here?
Thank you, Hazel. First of all, I was so incredibly inspired by this presentation. It just was really over the top. And I also want to thank Nushin for finding you. I assume she found you. Yeah, so my question was, how did you manage not to get discouraged going through the journey that you were on, where people try to negate everything that you said? How was it that you were able to, be so confident that in your thinking and in your understanding of the basic science of the chemistry that you were right? Because it seemed to be time after time, people try to poo-poo what you said and negate everything.
The key to that was being ultra sure of your facts. Whenever we came up with something new, say, for example, we had found nitrosamines in human blood, and at the time it was thought impossible a single pass in the liver would remove it. That's how it happened in animals. And but we checked our data. I had different people do the experiment. I came in one night on a long weekend and ran the whole experiment myself. So I knew we were right. And the key there is knowing that before you stick your neck out right on that chopping block, that you're right, that there's no way anyone can show you're wrong. And so whatever people throw at you, there's an inner feeling to yourself that they're full of shit. I'm right. I have to show them. It's just going to take time, and other people will prove it. In the case I mentioned of the nitrosamines in blood, it turned out that the person had also drunk a beer, and the beer overwhelmed the liver and allowed the nitrosamines to pass through. So it was, we were shown to be right at the end, and people had to apologize. But it's that being absolutely sure. I think if you're innovating, you really have to make sure that you're not going to be trapped. You haven't missed something. And that just takes intense self-questioning and repeating the experiments.
It's outstanding. Thank you, David. There's a question from Indra Nayak. Indra, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure, thanks, Hazel, and David, thanks a lot for your inspiring presentation. I want you talked a little bit about diversity, and I wanted to get your thoughts or more thoughts on how diversity fuels innovation. I did find a big difference when I moved from South Africa to the US, and having this large immigrant population that you work within, and I thought you could expand a little more on your experiences.
Yeah, I found working in the US, say with a scientist educated in Russia, another one from Germany, one from the UK, someone from China, Pakistan, India. I was from South Africa. We had such different backgrounds and upbringing. We thought about a problem differently. What was important to me was unimportant to someone from China, and other way around. And when we sat down to say, okay, we've got a problem, how do we solve this? And there are 8 people in the room. Very often, if they were all just Americans from the same background, we didn't move anywhere. If they were people from different backgrounds, they just had thoughts which I would never have come up with. And that triggered something else in me or someone else in the room. And that leading a discussion like that, I found to be extremely powerful. And I remember discussing that with the founder of Thermoelectron, George Atsopoulos, who also very strongly felt that way, that it was a very, very powerful, innovative process to have people with vastly different backgrounds and culture and status and just a way of thinking. We just think so very, very differently. And I think I can't describe it any more simpler than that. We just come at a problem from a different perspective.
I think that's a fantastic perspective. Let me invite Anyone else who would like to ask David something? In the meantime, let me follow up to Indran's excellent question, David, and ask you, in educating students, in chemistry education, in educating Wits students now, you know, I know there's a real push for innovation and education around that. Do you think that there's a kind of a fundamentally different way that students should learn, let's say chemistry, because that's your thing, but is there a fundamentally different way that students should learn chemistry than you did or than I did long ago that you think would change?
There are some things. I think when I learned chemistry, it was learned by rote. And I always fought that, and I sort of would derive my own equations rather than remember them. I had a very bad memory, so I would rather figure out where the science came from and then figure it out myself. The other aspect is don't know too much about your subject. I think a lot of PhD programs, particularly in the US, you're told to go and study the field for 6 months, read everything there is to know about it. That's the worst thing you can do to a researcher. They should rather go and read it for a couple of days, understand the problem, then generate their own thoughts and their own ideas without all the clutter of knowledge they're going to learn, which is going to tell them all the wrong things. Once they've thought about it and come up with their solution, then go and read the literature, then understand what's going on. And very often I found when I had my own students do that, own people who worked for me, they were able to solve problems. Whereas if they had gone off and read the literature, they'd come back and say, oh, this is the way to go. It's the only way to go. And I think it's bad for students to do that. I've run into problems when I've mentioned that at a couple of universities that I've been invited to talk at, because it's contrary to the way certainly postgraduate students are taught. But there's a lot of power in that. If you just read the history of science, so many discoveries are made by the young student, very often new to the field, and you can encourage that. I'm not saying don't read the literature and but do it, get enough knowledge and then go and think about it for a week or a month and solve it, and then go and read the literature. Now you've made progress. Hazel,
Terrific. Yeah, that's
I've got a question for you. You mentioned NO on the face. What is that? I know NO is a neurotransmitter. I didn't realize it involved in anything else in the body. Well, I knew it's obviously an important biological molecule. What does it do in the face?
Oh, well, we discovered that it's actually required for the cells of the face to come together and to shape the jaws and the rest of the face properly. So nitric oxide is part of the bradykinin signaling pathway. It's one of the outputs that controls blood pressure, but we discovered it also is essential for embryonic development and face formation. Very.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I'm familiar, obviously, with the blood pressure, the NO relating the.
Yeah, totally. I'll send you a paper, David. Thanks for asking. Number of questions here. So Dave Bloom would like to, I think, would like to ask a question, and then Lindy, and then Barry Dwalatsky, and then I have Romanth here. Please just raise your hand, then we can see you. Dave Bloom, go ahead and unmute. Did you want to ask a question, Dave? While Dave is figuring this out, Lindy, let's go to you.
Hazel?
Yeah.
Yeah, Hazel. I put in a question in the chat box.
I saw it,
I do not want this to be asked unless you think it's appropriate. It's a very different type of question.
Totally. I'll respond to you. Thanks so much. I saw it. I'm waiting for Lindy. You were muted.
Yes,
Perfect.
no,
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Fine, thank you so much for such a great presentation. That was really amazing and inspiring. Nushin, thank you for organizing, and Hazel for moderating. So quick one for you, Dr. Fine. So when you moved here to the US, did you have a support system? Or rather, what support system did you have? And to what extent did that also fuel your innovative mindset, if at all?
We had zero support system. I knew one person in North America. We came to Boston. I didn't know anybody in the area, not a single person. And so we were entirely on our own. It was quite literally the last place I wanted to come to. I arrived here on my 27th birthday, so I was able to avoid the draft for Vietnam. But all our friends became our American friends. There were no South Africans here at the time, or very few that didn't meet any. And it was there was just no support system whatsoever. We were on our own. So that was just never a factor. In fact, I found that people who came after me from South Africa, who did have a lot of friends here, it slowed their integration into American society, because they were always with their South African friends as opposed to making new friends and making American friends.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lindy. Great question. Let's see, Barry Dwalatsky.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Hazel and David, and all my other friends on the call. I don't have a question, but I just want to make a comment. And it's clear from what we've heard that you need a different environment to do innovation. So if you put it into a rigorous academic environment where the rules of academia apply, you probably don't get innovation. And the problem we sit with at Wits, and most universities sit with, is that they are great at generating new knowledge, but they're not that good at turning it into innovation. And I just want to say that the generous gift that we've received from David is making it possible for us to create such an ecosystem where people will be given the freedom and the space to do real innovation. So I think that we are trying to live the principle that David has taught us in terms of creating a space where people won't be called stupid or won't fail if they try something that's not quite usual. And that's the real value of the kind of lesson we're learning at Wits from what we've learned in conversation from David. So I just want to thank him publicly for this wonderful opportunity to give Wits the chance to drive innovation. And we certainly have very smart and very innovative people, and we'll produce lots more David Fines, I hope, I know. So just thank you for that.
Oh, there's one other aspect to that, which I don't think it may have come through in my presentation. At Samo Electron, under George Atsopoulos at that time, it was an extremely innovative company. I could do whatever I wanted as long as I brought in enough funds to cover my salary and people I hired. We were developing at that time the first artificial human heart. In fact, it was the first one approved as a mechanical assist device. There was a lot of very innovative things going on. There was a program with the Ford Motor Company to have an automotive steam engine. Wild stuff. Some of it failed, some of it wasn't a failure. And we were working with people who weren't afraid of failure. You tried something, you got a grant, and once your grant was funded, yeah, if it didn't work out, it didn't work out, but you were always writing new grants, and we were free to think. and think freely and interact with each other and interact across disciplines. That was an enormous benefit. And I think what Wits needs is a center where people are doing far out stuff, but they encourage each other, and students come around and watch that going on and see it, and young faculty, and become part of that and want to be part of it, as opposed to the strict rigor of academia and the strict promotion setup of academia. I think one thing that I found in academia was it was a very serious fault if you worked across disciplines, because if you wanted to get a promotion, you had to, and you wanted to get tenure, you had to get recommended by your own department. And heaven help you if you were working now, say, in chemical engineering with people from chemistry and physics. You may have done great research, but you weren't going to get tenure. And so that inhibited people. You've got to be able to be free in that research team to think and think wild stuff and not be laughed at.
That is very interesting. Thank you, David. Bruce Hubbard would like to ask you something. Bruce, please go ahead and unmute.
David, thank you once again for your presentation. One thing that I wanted to ask was that what was it that you think that the people at MIT saw in that interview that you had when you were very surprised to get the offer to come to Cambridge and join the faculty at MIT? What do you think you presented, and what did they see that made them offer you that position?
I think it was several things. They knew the professor I'd worked under in Leeds very well, was a part of the small combustion community. And I probably, it helped me a lot when they were telling me what they were doing, and I was critical sometimes of what they were doing or what they planned to do. And I had good reason to be critical. And I think they liked that. The fact that I was thinking independently of new ideas were coming in. And also I knew the field that they were working in, combustion and burners and engines and pollution, things like this, very well. It was a field that I was very much on top of. I had done a lot of that kind of work in Leeds, probing flames, understanding combustion, understanding the fluid dynamics that went into combustion. You know, I didn't do I never taken a chemical engineering course in my life, but I taught myself enough of the fluid dynamics and the other things apart from the chemistry of how a flame works, how an engine works, how a rocket engine works, how a gasoline engine works. Those actual fundamental processes, heat transfer, mass transfer. Beyond that, I can't guess. I mean, I'm just thinking that was. And we got on very well. I mean, once I was at MIT, I interacted with there were 4 professors, some associate junior professors. We got on very well. I mean, we were all able to interact with each other.
That's terrific. Thank you so much. Avroy, you have your hand up, I think.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, David, for a wonderful presentation. Another old Edwardian speaking. I'm not sure people on the call recognize how important your contribution with the nitric oxide was, but being a neonatologist, this was a game changer for babies with neonatal pulmonary hypertension. And in only parts per million, it was very powerful. My question for you, though, is with the pandemic, there's a lot of people now working from home, not going into the office. You're not getting the kind of interaction that you talked about that is so important for innovation. Do you think it's going to have a big impact, or do you think we will overcome this barrier?
I think that interaction is critical. At least you've got to do it by Zoom or something and interact with people. That exchange of ideas, everything I mentioned, I developed because I'd worked in a field or had done something or worked with something. If I wasn't doing that, that serendipity, those lucky breaks I had, which everyone has if they would follow it, how are they going to happen? You've got to have that interaction. You've got to be that chance lunch with a visitor into the nitrosamine field. That would never have happened. No one today they still may not have known how to measure nitrosamines. It just happens. You've got to have those interactions. Here was a physician who'd written a book on the politics of cancer, Sam Epstein, coming in to give us a talk. And at the last moment, I was pulled in for lunch because the person who was supposed to go couldn't make it. But those interactions are essential. Yeah, they are sometimes accidental, but how do you look at all the things that I've done that wouldn't have happened if we were all working at home?
Very true. Terrific. Dave Bloom, want to unmute there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Cyril Malansky, actually.
Cyril, that's not okay. That is funny. Cyril,
No.
put this in the chat. Okay, now we get it. Thank you, Cyril, so much.
Hi, David. I don't know if you remember me.
Oh, I remember you very well, Cyril.
Our relationship goes back 69 years. I haven't seen you since then. We were 11 or 12 years old, and we were friends, and we belonged to the same scouting organization in the same team.
Abonim, I remember that.
Yes, we used to meet in Emmarentia, and it was quite marvelous. I have to tell you that even then, when I knew you, I was impressed by your mind and the way you thought of things outside the box. But I could never understand how come you went and did chemistry, because most of us did other kind of professions. I remember interacting with you as a kid, and you would never let me come into your house. I don't know why. I think your mother was ill and your father was a physician, and there were certain restrictions, but nevertheless, we still were friends together. And I have to say that, excepting for your white hair, you're still the same. You are humble, and you've absolutely soared in your career. I'm a radiologist. I live in the United States. I live in the state of Delaware, about a mile away from President Biden's house. And it's really good to see you, and I enjoyed your talk immensely. Thank you.
Oh, it's great to see you, Cyril. What happened to your brother, Aubrey?
Well, Aubrey is still working and living in Boston, and he's a geneticist, and he's a contemporary of Arthur Rubinstein and Avery van der Rohe, who are maybe on this call as well. And Aubrey was the leader and brought us all together for the scouting movement.
I remember he was the maverick who led us.
Right, yes. Well, I can't believe you remember all this stuff.
I remember your house in Greenside very well.
And I remember your house too. It's marvelous seeing you.
Nice to see you after all these years. Wow. I wondered what had happened to you, and great to see you.
I lived in Boston for 8 years, and then I moved down here to Delaware to take on a job as a radiologist.
Well, nice to hear that. It's very nice to make contact again. Wow.
Sure is. Well, right. 69 years ago.
That's fantastic, Cyril. Thank you. Wonderful to use this venue for reconnections. Really, it's such a pleasure. Romanth, you have your hand up, please.
Yes, thank you, Hazel. So I have a rather complex, perhaps I should comment first before I ask the question. I graduated from Wits in med school. So did my father. My father was in Professor Tobias's class, and they were classmates. And I remember Prof. Tobias visiting us in Kenya many times, as did Christian Barnard at that time. My uncle also graduated from Wits, and my cousin recently graduated from Wits. I was at Wits. I had the opportunity of going to Wits probably around 10 years ago. And I'm an anesthesiologist with interventional pain management. So I do a lot of spinal implants, spinal procedures, and the like. And I was invited to do a presentation. And forgive me if I don't know the new names of the hospitals, but I went to Coronation Hospital and also at Parktown at the medical school. And after the presentation, I had the opportunity of talking to the chief of anesthesia. And, you know, while I was excited and thought I might contribute in any way more to Wits, I was caught between what our discussion sort of entailed. And that was basically around the fact that since the elimination of apartheid, there's been a lot of pressure to, and right or wrong, it's debatable, to push through people so in this case, anesthesia. And they were forced, or the department is forced to indirectly push through relatively incompetent people and get them qualified and push them out into the communities. Now, I don't have data, okay, in terms of how good these people are and whether they had complications, etc. But to me, that was very disheartening because we were supposed to be an open and free society with equal opportunity for all. And this clearly did not appear that way. So even now, while I have a great desire to contribute to it, I'm caught in this dilemma of what am I contributing to? Something that's clearly a reverse of what was there before independence, which shouldn't be, in my opinion. And so that, I mean, we don't have to discuss that because this is not going to be a political discussion. I just brought it up because of what I wanted to do for Wits and where I'm caught. But needless to say, I liked your presentation. I like the work on nitric oxide. We all know nitric oxide plays a very important role in the pulmonary system. And Hazel, thank you very much for saying it's important for facial development in embryos. Just a bit of my background. I work in Western New York area. My daughter works at Mass General, and she's been there for several years. My son's in med school. I had a study that was approved by the FDA on using regenerative medicine techniques, PRP and stem cells, into joints and intradiscal on patients that had degenerative discs that would otherwise have had back surgery. And we spent $70,000. Now I'm in private practice, so I don't have the privilege of being in an academic institution where I'm not forking out my own money. So after forking out $70,000 for a machine that would decorticate adipose tissue and give us the stem cells, after about 8 cases and 2 years of work, because you have to enroll patients in the strict criteria, the FDA came back and shut us down. And they couldn't care less. They said, we don't like the idea that you're manipulating adipose tissue to get the stem cells. So that was the end of the study. However, with that being said, I have been doing, but you don't need FDA approval for that, autologous stem cell and PRP. And the results are remarkable. We, unfortunately, in the USA, as much as we think we're ahead of the world, we are in the medieval dark ages when it comes to regenerative medicine. And part of the reason for that is an FDA. Australia is way ahead. Believe it or not, Russia's way ahead, and Europe is way, way ahead. We do unnecessary back surgeries in this country. Data is absolutely right. There's too many unnecessary back surgeries, and it's based on the reimbursement structure. We have a serious problem in this country. And I was involved in a startup company, of course, which had to close because of COVID and lack of funding, that was looking at inert gases as a method of helium, essentially. It was looking at the helium as a method of allowing a 20-minute time frame between an observed or non-observed cardiac arrest event outside to the time the ambulance picks you up and brings you in for resuscitation. So if you insufflated the lungs with helium, you would actually have brain protection up to 20 minutes instead of a dead brain at 5 minutes. which was
Roman,
very, yeah.
This is fascinating, but I'm just looking at our time here,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it's lovely to hear from you. I
So
just
the question-
wonder if you have a question, but I'm also
Yes.
wondering if Nushan actually wanted to address the point that you were raising about, giving to Wits within the landscape. And if that's true, Nushan, perhaps I could invite you to address the question that Romanth raised, the point that Romanth raised.
Yes. I think that actually, let me just say that one of the two most important institutions for keeping up our global excellence in medical research and the levels of the qualified doctors is Wits, and obviously the other university near the coast that we won't mention. But I'll just say quickly, my friend has been through the Wits system, is a qualified doctor, is a qualified physician. And one of the things that they'll always, ask is this person a Wits graduate? And it always means that this is someone we know is good and we can trust. And that's, I think on the ground, the Wits doctors are continue to be the best. And there's no, there across the whole university, there is no question that we do not allow for any lowering of standards. I have, Prof. Barry is here. Maybe you can kind of help answer this query, because it is something that, it is something to that, perhaps is a bit of an urban legend, that something that, qualifications standards are lowered to push people through, and that actually is not the case.
Totally. Nushan, thanks so much. Jane, were you going to make a comment on this particular point also, or did you have something else that you wanted? Okay, so I'm looking at our time, folks. We have 2 more minutes, and want to make sure that we get to everybody. So Barry, I don't know if you wanted to say anything to augment the comment that Nushan made about the training at Wits, and then Jane, you, and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, I think just in a couple of sentences, Wits is still a top university, both in research and teaching. And I think that the proof of the pudding is to see where Wits graduates are landing up still. And it's one of the things that pains my heart is that a lot of our brightest and best leave South Africa and are snapped up in the US and across the world. So I think we're still very proud of the graduates we produce. And we work in a very difficult environment educationally. But I've got absolutely no doubt, having been linked to Wits for 50 years, and I'm still there, we've got high quality graduates who are the best in the world at what they do. And I can say that with a lot of knowledge. So yeah, no concerns about our quality.
Thanks, Barry. Jane.
Great. So happy to have the final word. David, this was phenomenal. Really lapped up every minute of your presentation and the questions thereafter. Actually, I have what's quite a simplified question in a way. There is another great innovator, in fact, widely regarded as probably the world's best or amongst them, Elon Musk, another South African. And I can't help but wonder, even though he didn't go to Wits, whether there was something in the water in South Africa and the way maybe we were brought up or whatever it was that engendered this kind of innovative thinking and this kind of cross-disciplinary approach to solving problems. So I would love your, stream of consciousness. Any idea why that is?
I think it's just chance. I can't believe. Well, South Africa is different. It's different in another way, in that we were very we were like 20 years behind America in many things. I did a research project at Wits for my BS honors degree, and I remember I had to buy equipment, and it came in by boat from the UK. So I had to think 3 months ahead as to what equipment I would buy and what I would use and how I would assemble it. This is electronics. And well, today in America, you worry about it at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's on your table the next morning by FedEx or something else. But even 40 years ago in the US, you could get things very quickly. So you had to be much more self-reliant. You had to build things. You had to repair your own things. If something broke down, you fixed it. You didn't just throw it out and get another one. I don't know how much that helps, because it made you think how it worked. What made that thing tick? What made that thing work? What made that piece of equipment function? How did that vacuum tube work? Could you fix it? So there may be some of that. I don't know, but it may be. Musk is obviously a unique character. Obviously a brilliant innovator, but he's got something else. He's also a brilliant financial innovator, which very few people have, and that's what sort of makes him so very, very different. He's able to take ideas and have the resources and the ability to follow them all the way through. Anything I developed myself where I had a solution to a problem that didn't exist, I was failed at. I developed, very early on, three-dimensional printing in the 80s, and people were laughing at it. What the hell is that for? Well, I didn't have the resources or the ability or the interest to go into the financial side of making that happen. And a guy like Musk does that. He's also a very different character in his personal life. I mean, it's very different than most people can handle.
Terrific. So Colin, I see your hand up, and I'm not going to ignore you, but I'm cognizant of the time. So I am officially going to wrap this up. I would like to thank you, Dr. David Fine, for spending this evening with us, for really your wisdom, your, I would say, sparkling approach to chemistry, which has been so interesting, so productive, that has taken you all over the place in the most eminent and fascinating and useful ways. We've learned so much from you, from your actual trajectory and all of the different aspects of your life, from your philosophy, and from the interface that you have between your own work and your love of Wits still, and your engagement with our alma mater. And it's just been an extraordinary pleasure and honor to have you speak with us this evening. Thank you for all you are doing for Wits. Thank you for sharing everything that you've shared with us. It's wonderful to see this group of people, alumni, and those who are also Wits supporters or associated with David. Thank you so much for being here. We look forward to your input about future Indabas. The group of us that considers the speakers for these has considered Nushan and Indran lead us in this, and thank you so much. But we are totally open to suggestions, and I already have a suggestion from Colin Richmond, who I think has a suggestion for the group, and that's what we'll hear from him in a moment. But I'm officially going to wrap up. Thank you so much. Wonderful to see you. All of you take care of yourselves, and we look forward to seeing you soon for our next Indaba. And those of you who stay, Colin, if you're still here, please go ahead and unmute.